right. Thank you for having us. We it's really wonderful to be here. It's, as far as I can tell, it's been 20 years since I've been here, and it was 22 years ago that I lived here for a little. For really, it was a few months. But we started this trip in Orange County. Megan grew up going to St. Barnabas Church in Costa Mesa, and her parents were founding members of that church through the what was previously the Evangelical Orthodox Church group that came in right about the same time that our group came in, and so it was really important that we would be able to get to connect with the people that raised her and formed her, together with her family, and that she got to bring all of us and to show her new family, and share what we're doing. And this is sort of, for me, a similar thing because I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and in another, Brotherhood parish. But when I came here, I was 22, and I hadn't been going to church for a few years anyway. I mean, Orthodoxy was always important to me, and it was something that was sort of very fundamental for me, but I wasn't sure how to connect to it. And when I came here, when I saw the community and I experienced the life that you lived here, everything came into focus for me. I was like, okay, if that's what Orthodoxy does, if that's what we're trying to do, what's going on here, then that makes sense to me, and that's what I want. And that was like a really big turning point for me. And so even though I was only here for a little time, it was super impactful. And I partly want to tell you that story because I know sometimes it's not, a lot of you have been here probably my whole life. You've committed a lot to being here and to growing this place and building this beautiful church that you have. It's the first time I'm seeing it. And sometimes you don't always realize the fruit that comes from your labors. Sometimes you do. You have now Father Gabriel, is recently ordained, and he was 6 years old when I was here, and I'm not surprised at all that he's a priest, and I'm sure he's one, and that's one of your fruits, but I and my family really are too, in a way that you might not know. You might not have known that so much before, so I'm really thankful for you having me when I was here, and for the connections we maintain, and for letting us come back and tell you about this further fruit from partly due to my time here. I'm going for the middle length. I could talk for hours. You know what I mean? This is our whole life right now. But I'll just say, 10 years ago or so, my brother Christopher got married to a gal from Eagle River, Alaska, at St. John's Antiochian Orthodox Church. At the time, I was living in Oregon in a little mission there, and I went up for the wedding, and I met Megan. I actually hardly met Megan, to be honest. Like, I saw Megan walk, and I saw her that she was taking care of everything and everyone while all the wedding festivities are going on. Katie is a very well-loved member of that church, my brother's wife, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people around, and it was just kind of chaos, but Megan was sort of always in the middle of it, and I was too busy to talk to her, but I wasn't too busy to notice what she was doing, and fortunately we got a chance to kind of meet after the wedding was over, and then I went home and packed, basically. That's the whole story. So we've been married, it'll be 10 years in January, and actually I think I got some really good advice when I first got married, which is go get a real job. Like get a regular, because I'd been doing carpentry and stuff most of my life, and that was what I know the best, but so I applied for like 16 jobs, eventually got a job with the state just doing admin stuff, and I did that for about getting towards 7 years, and I was starting to read a lot of different things, and I read one author, Nassim Taleb. He's just an interesting sort of philosopher, and he said people would ask him, how do you make the world a better place? That's always the question people have, right? And he said one of his answers was, you go start a business. And for some reason, when I read that on my bus ride home from my state job that I was supposed to have for the next 23 years, so I retired, I just clicked like, I need to do that. And it didn't, I really never wanted to start a business, ever. That was not something interesting to me at all. But I took that paper over, I printed that chapter out that I was reading, I printed over and I wrote down, like, what do I know how to do? I know how to do carpentry and stuff like that. So I started a business. And I came home, like, got off the bus. Hey honey, guess what? Thinking about starting a business. Like, this is not something that gradually came up, it just happened on a bus ride. And so little by little we put it together, and it worked out really well for us that we were able to start a little business. It was me, I had 1 or 2 guys working for me for a while. And then about a year later, after I'd sort of gone full time, it was the beginning of Lent, and I had a painting job to do, and painting means I'm going to listen to a lot of podcasts because it doesn't require much brain work, but it's pretty tedious. So because it was Lent, I went on Ancient Faith Radio and I just downloaded like every random podcast I could find, and without thinking much of it. And then one of the podcasts was titled "Missionary to New Zealand," Father Paul Patitsis. I thought, that's weird, I never heard of that. And I remember distinctly thinking, like, I like New Zealand accents, I'll check it out. And so I'm painting this house, and I listened to this podcast eventually, after a few days, and it's about 30 minutes, and so this priest, an American priest, his name is Father Paul Patitsis, was in New Zealand for about 10 years working, and he was telling the story about this Metropolitan Amphilochios. He's a disciple of Saint Amphilochios of Patmos, and he had done mission work in the 1970s in Africa. He'd started a bunch of monasteries and was quite a prolific elder in the Greek islands. And in 2005 he was consecrated Metropolitan and sent to New Zealand, and they gave him a specific instruction to minister to the faithful, the Greek expats who were in Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, because it was known that there were some Greek families there, and so he was told to go there in particular. So he thought, okay, I'll go there, and he started. Once he got established in New Zealand, a couple years later, he started visiting these island countries, these island nations, and in Fiji, he found one Orthodox person left. So, but he thought, is the Orthodox Church only for Greek people? Or do these people, would they want to know? Of course they would want to know. Don't they want to, at least have the opportunity to learn about Orthodoxy? And so he decided to stay and see what he could do to spread the Orthodox faith. One thing about Fiji, just because it's important throughout this story, Fiji was a British colony for almost 100 years, up until 1970, and the British took over Fiji because they wanted to, in large part because of agriculture. They wanted to grow sugar and cotton. Those in the late 1800s, those were very profitable crops, but they couldn't get the Fijians to do the work. Fijians didn't. The island lifestyle, if you've ever heard that kind of idea, it's so true. It's unreal. Like, I had it described to me that the people there, they don't often work unless they need something, because they all take care of each other so well that unless there's a specific need that they can't take care of, they're not liable to go to work or keep a job for very long. So this is the British went in and sort of probably had a little difficulty figuring out how to deal with that. So what they did is they brought in 40,000 people from India and had them work on the plantations instead. So now there's about a 40-60 split, 40% Indo-Fijian and 60% the native Melanesian Fijians. So this Metropolitan Amphilochios was visiting, and basically his mission style was to walk around and talk to people. And when he would do that, incredible things started to happen. For example, in Fiji, he was walking around in a tourist area, and a woman who was working in a store, she's an Indo-Fijian, so not Christian at all, she's Hindu. She sees him, she's in her store and she sees him outside walk by, and she says, who is this man? But she said she felt compelled to take his blessing. And so she left her store, she walked outside with a glass of water and gave it to him and said, "Who are you? Like, what are you doing here?" And he said, explained that he's Orthodox and that they're here in Fiji, and they had heard that, especially in Fiji, there's a lot of children who aren't taken care of well, or can't be taken care of by their parents because of poverty and some other, unfortunate patterns in that culture. So he said, we're hoping to, do something to help these children. And so she stayed in contact, and she and her best friend were baptized together, among the first Fijians to be baptized. And then they became nuns, both of them. And they started a monastery, and then in time an orphanage was started, and they run the orphanage. And that was all just from her seeing him walk by, literally. And his retinue, the monks that would travel with him would ask, like, what's our plan? What are we going to do when you get here? And he said, we're just going to see who God brings to us, and we'll see what happens. Like, they didn't know, he didn't have any he didn't have money, he didn't have a plan at all. It was just, he went there and made himself available to the Holy Spirit. And in Fiji now there's 4 Fijian priests, the 2 nuns in the orphanage. There's 4 churches, and on 2 different, 3 on one island and 1 on a second island, and about 400 Fijian Orthodox people. I would say, I think it's safe to say more than half of those people are from the Indo-Fijian background, meaning that they probably knew little or nothing about Christianity at all. So this is, the Fijian population are mostly Christian, predominantly Methodist, but but either way, so it's not just bringing orthodoxy to Christian people who have already heard the gospel and but are definitely embracing the fullness of the faith, but it's also to people who've never heard the gospel at all. One other story about the Metropolitan, he went to the second island of Fiji in a town called Lambasa, and he was again walking around and meeting people, and they went into an internet cafe, and he met the man that worked there, and they were just chatting, and the man told him, like, I'm at work, I have to go back to work, and he said, okay, when are you done with work? He said, 1 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock, the Metropolitan's outside waiting for him, and they go, and he says, let's go have tea. So they're talking, learning about each other. This is another Hindu man. And in the middle of the conversation, they're speaking through a translator, a nun who spoke Greek and English. And he says in Greek to the nun, ask this man if he wants to become an Orthodox priest. And she looked over at him and said, what? What are you talking about? You just met him today. He's like, just ask him. And she did, and he said yes. And he had to, I had to go tell my wife about the business. He had to go tell his wife, and she was quite surprised at that too, for obvious reasons. But this man now, his name is Father Varnava or Barnabas, and he has over 150 people in this parish. That's, similar to your chapel, what it was before. A very just a little house that was converted into a church, and they're just bursting out. Just like here, lots of people outside during liturgy. But the people are embracing the faith, and this Father Barnava is pastoring them. You can see there's a documentary that some filmmakers in New Zealand made, and you can see in the interviews, you can just see love just pours out of this man. It's just incredible, and the simple faith and that he and his wife both carry is really astonishing. So I'm listening to these kind of stories, right? And with interest, of course. I was just talking to Kate just real briefly, and she's pointing out we've never heard of this mission. Nobody knows about this ministry at all, and I didn't either. And so it's fascinating to hear that it's going on. But I just started a business. I got a young family. So my track is pretty well set for the next 5 years, in my mind. And then, and at the end, an interesting thing happened where the priest, Father Paul, was saying, the interviewer asked how people could support the ministry, and he said, you can support us through, of course, through prayer. That's always the first thing. You can, if you want to support one of the ministries with a donation, you can do that. And then he said, there's some people out there, I'm hoping, who are listening to my words and hearing what I'm saying, and you know that I'm talking to you. We want you to come and help. And that was, just something happened where God just kind of knocked me over and said, did you hear that? And I was very surprised, to say the least. It was the furthest thing from my mind. And I didn't know what that meant, right? Like, what does that mean to help? Like, I don't know. We've been figuring that out for 2.5 years, and we're still working on it. But it was very clear to me that I was one of those people. Hopefully there's other people who are going to come and help, because there's a lot to be done. But then I had to go and tell my wife again, we got a new thing to talk about. And I don't know what it means, but I ordered a map of New Zealand and put it up on the wall. Like, okay, this is interesting. Here's this place 5,700 miles away that I've never, I really had to look up even where Fiji was. I didn't know. So I wrote to Father Paul, and I wrote him an email, and I said, well, here's who I am. This is sort of my history. Sweetie, I don't know where she went, but you just stay with me. And I explained, that I listened to this podcast interview that I'd given, and I felt like I needed to help. And, here are the skills that I have, with carpentry mostly and some administration stuff. And he wrote back, and the first 2 words were, I accept. I'm like, and so but he, is of course very happy to hear from me, and he told me later that he was in charge of the Tonga mission, and they had built a small chapel to Saints Peter and Paul, but very quickly grew out of it, and they started building a much larger church dedicated to Saint George, the great martyr, and the construction had stalled out basically, and they had a lot of problems building, and they were about halfway done, and they needed help. And so he had been praying for 3 weeks, the Akathis, to the Archangel Michael for a solution to finish this church. And then he gets an email from me, Michael, I can help you build a church. So, God's just weaving all these things together, and we've been seeing this, over and over again this whole time as we've been going through this process, but just God's hand is in every little step. So a couple weeks later, after we've emailed a few times, and he talked to the Metropolitan, so there was a new Metropolitan. The previous Metropolitan, Amphilochios, retired. He's alive, but he's almost 90 now. He retired, I think, 3 years ago. And they sent a new Metropolitan. He was a monk in Crete. And I think, as far as I can understand, they just sort of plucked him out of the monastery and sent him over. He didn't know anything about the mission work that was going on until he got on to New Zealand. So it was all a surprise to him that he was a missionary bishop. But he, took it all in stride, and he's working really hard to continue with the work. And he was making his first site visit to Tonga. So this is a couple weeks after I reached out to Father Paul, and he says, His Eminence, Metropolitan Muron, will be visiting Tonga, and he invites you to come and, meet him and look at the project. He'll be in Tonga in, what's that? Myron, yeah. And he invites you to come, and he'll be there in 10 days. Okay, well, so I talked to my priest at home, and he's like, well, if you're going to work with these people, you better get to know them. So I checked with Meghan, got a blessing, and I went for 4 days. It was a pretty quick trip. It's an hour, it's from Alaska, it's a day and a half flying each way, so I spent almost as much time traveling as I did in Tonga. But I got to meet the bishop. I got to meet Father Paul, who had given that interview, and also the hieromonk abbot Amphilochios, who currently oversees all the mission work. They were all there, and I got to to just see what Tonga was like, see what the building project was like. It's pretty substantial. And then I went home, and that was April 2019, and nothing sort of materialized for a while, and I got a little bit frustrated because like even into the winter I couldn't, things are clicking. Obviously things were happening very fast sometimes, and then nothing was happening, and I couldn't sort of make sense. And eventually I reached out to Father Paul again in it's February, and I said, Father Paul, I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling a little bit frustrated because I don't know what to do. And he said, well, actually there's 3 men there from Greece who just went to finish the domes of the church. Because it wasn't even weatherproof at that time. There was no windows, there was no doors, it was a concrete shell. And they went to finish sort of the major construction, and they were trying to get it weatherproof, or dried in is the construction term, so that at least it was protected and it wouldn't deteriorate moving forward. They'd been there for 3 months. They had extended their visa. They had 1 more month to finish, but they'd run out of money, and they were not going to be able to finish everything that needed to be done. And Father Paul said, I think what you need to do is you need to find a few skilled men and raise some money and go help these men finish, help them get this part of the project done. And I just told Father Paul, I was like, Father Paul, you're crazy. Like, how are we going to do this? In a month, we have nothing, And he said, look, nobody would have started building a church in Tonga if they weren't a little bit crazy. Like, this is what we do. This is the ministry that we have. Like, if you want to reach out and have an apostolic ministry, you've got to go out on a limb. And I really had no argument. So I, again, checked with Meghan and prayed and felt at peace about it. And so I started calling friends. I called, one of the people that came was David Young from Colorado, who, of course, most of you know, Father Gabriel's brother-in-law. But I ended up getting 4 other people to come in about 2 days. I got 4 people to agree to come, and then at Sunday church, just sort of at coffee hour, just put out a notice like, we're going to Tonga in a couple weeks. You can help us. But we ended up raising almost $20,000 in about 2 weeks from people in our church and other places. We got all of us on the plane, and in 2 weeks we were in Tonga, and we met these 3 men from Greece. We helped them finish a couple different projects. We actually, there's the 8 windows in the Greek. The Greek word is the trullos up there, the tower of the church. We had to build those. We had to build 8 windows by hand. We built the frames. We had glass inserts to put in for the arches, but it was pretty tedious work. But we got that done. The Greeks sort of finished the rest of the windows in at least the nave, so the nave is protected. The downstairs is still open, but the nave on the second story is all protected at least. So, but then the Greek men are saying, we just stay 1 more week and we can get a banister built on the balcony, and it'll be safe for everybody. Just help us just stay that much longer. And we thought, probably need to get home. And it turns out we got home, and a week later the whole world shut down because of COVID. And the Greek men got stuck in Fiji. They were on their way home, and they got as far as Fiji, and then they locked everything down. They couldn't go back to Tonga, and they couldn't go home. And they were able to stay at the mission center there in Fiji, but they were basically alone for 6 weeks, stranded there. So I'm really glad we didn't stay and help them. But at least nobody's been in that church ever since they left a year and a half ago. It's been closed, and because it's not functioning yet. And if it hadn't have been weatherproof, it would have been, subject to all this, just to the storms and everything else for the last year and a half, with nothing that anybody could do about it. So Father Paul, he had said, like, I don't know why I'm telling you, but you have to go right now. And again, we could have never imagined how how true that was, without looking back in hindsight. So while I was there, it occurred to me that, well, I already knew that the project was never going to get finished. A project that big was never going to happen unless somebody just stayed there. They needed a project manager to stay there and get it done. And I already knew that, but I wasn't really ready to go do it. But on that second trip, it just came to me really clearly, like, I'm free to do this. We can do this as long as Megan's up for it, Of course, there's that caveat. But, so again, I'm calling her from Tonga saying, honey, what do you think about moving to Tonga for a year or so? Like, okay. And she takes it all in stride. And she's going to tell a little bit about her version of all this, which is, I think, really helpful. But, what's that?
Come on.
Yes, I know what a golden woman I have for a wife. Absolutely. So just to say, that was the impetus for sort of starting on this, in this process of applying to OCMC to become a long-term missionary to go, and with the idea of building the church. But as we learn more about missions, through OCMC, we've been doing basically a master's level course in missiology. And we did a week-long training with a cohort of people in,
Then what about this car?
who other missionaries, some going to Mexico and Guatemala and other places. And we, through that process, we started to see that two things. One is that just if you're gonna do missions, like foreign missions, it's a slow process. This isn't something that, you get a lot done in 6 months. You know what I mean? You spend your first year just figuring out how to exist in a new culture with a new language and, all kinds of, ways of interacting that you don't understand, and you can't just read in a book, and that's usually like a year, and then you just start to be able to interface with the culture at that point, and so it just takes time to build, a ministry, and especially in a foreign mission setting, and so, and also because Tonga never reopened and still hasn't reopened, the idea of going back to Tonga had to be put on the shelf because we simply can't. I think they were among the strictest lockdowns of the world in that country. So Fiji has been open. They're closed now, but they're looking to reopen November 1st. And so little by little we realized this isn't about building a church, really. I mean, that was sort of the thing. That was the first pull, but we both came to see clearly that God's really calling us to go and participate in the broader ministry throughout the region of the South Pacific, assisting the Metropolis in New Zealand. And it makes more sense for us to go to Fiji, where they have a much more established community. They have a lot more things going on, so the need is more immediate. And we get a lot more support for our family by being with a group of 200 people rather than a couple of families who've just become Orthodox and aren't very familiar, in Tonga. That would have been very, very hard. So the project isn't going to be stopped, but it might be more that we stay in Fiji and then I'll go for a couple weeks at a time and take groups there to build or something. Yes, Father?
What's the travel time from Fiji?
Fiji to Tonga is quite close. It's an hour and a half. It's like 300 miles. Yeah, so it's to get to Fiji from here, from LA is a 10-hour flight. They have a daily flight, Fiji to LA, back and forth. They just go every day at 8:30 at night from here. So it's about 10 hours. But and then another hour and a half if you're going to Tonga. And Samoa is not much farther away. So those are very accessible from Fiji. Fiji is the hub country of the South Pacific, of that part of the South Pacific. So really, for us now, our focus has really changed. I will probably be doing building projects. That's probably going to be a big part of what I'm doing with my time. But really, we're shifting to making our focus going to Fiji, for example, and helping, just being with the community there, and together looking forward and saying, what is the Fijian Orthodox Church going to look like? Not that we have to solve any kind of problem, but just helping them develop how does Orthodoxy fit with their culture? A pretty well-known OCMC missionary to Albania, Nathan Hoppy, has been talking about this idea a lot of building local Eucharistic communities. Communities like this where you're doing things together, you're living life together, communities that have life and they can reproduce, they can heal themselves like a body, like communities that are really a healthy body. And every time you go to a new country or new culture, that incarnates in a new way to reflect the people that are in that culture. So whatever that means. I think we're all sort of in the process of doing that in America right now. This is the phase in this last 30 years since we've all become Orthodox. We're manifesting the church in a new incarnation that reflects who we are and our culture, and it leaves the bad parts, keeps the good parts, and we grow in our understanding of the truth. So it's really that same process is really at the very beginning in Fiji, and especially even more so in Tonga and Samoa. It's hardly begun. But for us to go and to be a part of that, and to really just love and serve the people of Fiji, and I think to be loved and served by them, because they have that gift much more than I do, frankly. They're such wonderful people. Like I said, they take care of each other. That's the first rule of their culture, is we're going to take care of each other. And so that's really the whole thing in a nutshell. I think I wanted to give Meghan a chance to talk a little bit, because, like Obadiah Junia said, she's great. But also because I think her part of this story, I'm the one who I get the messages. I've been to Tonga twice. I've been to Fiji. We had long layovers on that second trip. I got to go to Fiji. I met the nuns. I met the orphans. I got to spend a week with one of the Fijian priests. It's easy for me to want to make a move like this. For Meghan, it's not. She's gotten none of that. So, but I think, as somebody in her parish said last week, after I gave this similar kind of talk, that he went to Meghan and said, "You're the second bravest person I know, right after my wife." And I think he's right. He's really clued into something. So, come here, brave one.
Michael!
Oh yes, sorry.
If the Fijians take care of themselves, where are these orphans coming from?
That's a good question. I would say, like any culture, there are some people who exemplify the better parts of their culture better than others. There's a lot of poverty in Fiji. And so, for example, sometimes some of these children are, specifically 2 of the boys at the orphanage are, they're 2 out of 10 kids in their family, and their parents just don't have enough money to pay to feed them all. There just aren't the resources there. And so the choice, I don't know exactly the exact relationships that got them there, but that was, having this orphanage is the best way that they could take care of them, is having them go and be a part of that community. But yeah, it's not to make it too idyllic, like it's a perfect place, or that there's not, problems in the cultures, but as a general operating principle, the people look to each other first to build like community, rather than looking to build up things, or to have a nicer house, or to have a better car, or things like that. It's not that nobody wants those things, right? There are plenty of people, and there are people who are going to take advantage of other people for sure. But if you look at like sort of what's their history and the way that they've stayed together for such a long time, that sort of love for each other has been a really really foundational. It really does show, when you go and visit them. So.
Okay, now for my part of this, which is much more brief because I haven't traveled and met so many people, but I have a story too, and I think I have learned to trust God through this process. Like, even back with starting the business, like giving up benefits and stable pay, and then suddenly Michael getting invited to go to Tonga and then going again. But I think a book I read once has shaped me. Actually, I went, before I ever met Michael, to Spruce Island for the St. Herman pilgrimage. Maybe some of you have been there. And I wound up staying with the nuns on St. Nelis Island, an island over. And the abbess said, "Why don't you read this book?" I had a nice talk with her on the beach, and one of her suggestions, read this book. It's called Ascetic of Love, like the life of Mother Gavrilia. And she, that book really spoke to me in a number of ways, but one thing is that she always said yes if you can. Say yes if you can to God and to everyone. And so I've taken that to heart. Just like to be generous with my time, watch a friend's kids if I can, just do the little things, and now the big things, I guess. I don't have a good reason, not to. And honestly, it's been sort of scary, like to give up. We live up a mile from my parents and 3 of my siblings and friends that it took a while to make in Alaska. I've been there 14 years now, but it took a while to make, and so a very solid, supportive community. But I think the turning point for me, for a long time, I did not want to do this, but the turning point for me was first, I think when we got involved with OCMC, when we did the reading course, we read a lot, especially a lot of Archbishop Anastasios of Albania, and doing the reading course and then doing a week-long training with OCMC, and just some of the nuggets that helped me, I think, with my faith were like, God is the master architect and we are the bricklayers. Like, I don't know the big plan. I don't know why he's choosing us to go do this. But, okay, can I do the one thing set in front of me? Okay, yeah. I think another thing that helped me just get on board with this was, well, here, let me back up a little bit. Like, we pray every week. Like, let us commend ourselves and each other and all our lives unto Christ our God. And, like, I'm thankful I grew up Orthodox. Like, I learned the love of God through my parents. And I've had this mindset. But now, like, I don't know why God is calling us to do this. But there's the gospel story of the feeding of the 5,000. And everyone's been listening to Jesus all day. They're hungry. Nobody has anything except for the one boy with the awesome mom who packed him the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And he takes and he gives that to God. It is not enough for all those people, but God takes his not enough and makes it more than enough. And I feel very not enough to go be a missionary. But can I trust God that he will take my not enough and make it more than enough? Can I? That has been encouraging, and through all this time, that's been my journey, like learning to trust God.
So I think we're gonna meet this evening. I do have some pictures just on my iPad of our last trip to Tonga that I'm happy to share with anybody. whether it's now if you can't make it this evening or later on, we're good to finish up, yeah? You want to do it? Yeah.
Can you tell us how we can support you guys?
Okay, yeah, so there, really praying for us is so important. I know everybody says that first, and I'm trying not. I wanted a really good reason to know why to say that first, rather than because you're supposed to say that first. And what I was through our reading course, one of the things I came to is that, or one of the things I learned, let's say, is from Archbishop Amphilochios about that there's no such thing as a missionary who goes alone. If a missionary, like mission means sent, right? If you're not here sending us, we're not missionaries, right? That's by definition. We can't go without you, without the body of the church, right? And so when you're in liturgy and praying for us, and that communion of love, also the other thing that he said is that communion of love that we share through the liturgy and through our life together is the gospel message, right? There's ideas that go along with that. There's, knowledge of Christ and everything like that. But the way that we witness to people outside of the church is by how we love each other. They will know that you're Christians by your love, and it starts with that. And so that's what your prayer is. Your prayer is engaging in communion with us all together as the body of the church, and then sending us as the arms and the fingers to go and do a work that God's given us to do. But so that really is so important to us. And then financially, if you want to support our expenses are covered through OCMC, so you can go to the ocmc.org, and we have a web page amongst all the other missionaries there, and you can donate either a one-time or a monthly thing. And one thing to know is that it's matched right now. OCMC found a donor who would match for all the missionaries for this first year of our fundraising, because they're so backed up trying to get missionaries out. They have a really good problem right now, which is that they're getting a lot more applications and doing a lot more trainings of new missionaries than they ever have. So I think they're at 31, which is equal to their highest number of missionaries in the field, and there's something like 9 or 10 of us getting ready to deploy. So that's really good. Anyway, so whatever you can give us will be matched for that first year. So that helps a lot. That's made our job a lot easier. And then I don't know, I was going to talk to Father Michael about this tonight, and I don't have it really clearly defined, but I was thinking if there's some way that we could talk about just keeping our relationship together, making this, a stop where we can come back and we can connect with you, and maybe one day there'll be a project and you guys will say, we want to help you build this school, or we want to help you build this church, or something like that, and just be open to something like that. And it doesn't mean I recognize coming up with $500,000 might not be realistic, right? But the point isn't so much how much, it's giving your love and sacrifice, not in a hurtful way, right? But every sacrificing together, that we can help this ministry to succeed. It's going to take a lot more than all of us, for sure. There's so much to do there, but I don't know, maybe we can talk about something like that. I'm sorry, for a businessman, I'm not very businessman-like sometimes, but I'm trying. But really, that, if you think about that, and the other thing is, if you can come, please come, really. And it could be for a week or two, it could be for a month or two. You can just come love the orphans, and they'll love you back, and you'll be blown away. It'll change your life. 4 hours is all I spent with them. It's changed my life. And spend 4 weeks with them and see what happens. But and with those people there, or come. There's building projects. We're doing catechism. We're going to try and build a school and where we can do catechism and teaching. They especially need people to teach English language, because the children grow up speaking Indo-Fijian or their native Fijian language, but then they learn English, which is their third national language, and they conduct all their business in what's a second language to them. So they always need help with English, especially the older kids. So there's a lot of practical things you could do. Also, if you come and be with us. So Yeah, and tell your friends. Really, that's the other thing. Is part of our travels is just hoping to get Fiji on the map, as it were, but really let people know there's a ministry going on that we could use everybody's prayers.